I want to look at some of the new note chopping and rejoining features that are available in Live 12 in a somewhat unorthodox context, which is I want to use it to look at how to potentially transcribe and maybe even learn really complicated music. So the kind of music that you would normally learn via notation is now pretty easy to create in a MIDI clip in Live, because it's possible to slice notes and then rejoin them over and over and over again in arbitrary divisions. And this allows you to do interesting things like nested tuplets. So what I want to do is take a look at the first 3 bars of this pretty notorious solo percussion piece called Bone Alphabet by the composer Brian Fernyhough. There's a nice article about this written by the percussionist Stephen Schick, who the piece was written for. And this article talks through how Schick learned the piece, which was essentially by like mapping these very complex rhythms out on graph paper and figuring out the least common multiple of very complex rhythms, some of which involve these nested tuplets. And it's interesting to imagine what it might be like if you could learn a piece like this by ear. So program it into a sequencer and then listen to it in a loop or something. Probably not something that would have been so easily done in 1994 when this article was written. It's not necessarily easy to learn a piece like this now, but it's interesting to think about what 20 years of technology might make available now. So let's look really quickly at how some of this works in Live. I have a note here and it has some arbitrary length. And if I hit Command E, or I think this is probably Control E on Windows, I can chop this note on the grid. Okay, cool. That's not what we want though. We want to chop it in arbitrary divisions. So if you hit Command E and continue to hold Command, then the arrow keys up and down allow you to change the divisions in whole number increments. Okay, so we're part way to something really interesting now, which is that it's now possible to slice notes into arbitrary and equal strange divisions. So I don't even know how much space we have there, but let's say we want to chop it into 10 slices. Cool, that's the first step of the equation. The other thing that you can do now in Live 12 is rejoin notes. So let's say we take 4 of these weird divisions and hit Command J. This puts them back together into one note. Cool, that's the second part of our equation. Now, in a world where we might want something like a triplet inside a quintuplet, we would need to join and then redivide again. So we can do that now that we've put together our 4 notes that was some portion of 10 into a single note. We can now redivide these in the same way using Command E and not on the grid, but instead up and down arrow keys. And you could see what happened there. When I first divided it, it tried to chop on the grid, which meant you have these strange sort of extra notes that are on the edges of the grid. As soon as we continue to hold down Command and hit the up and down arrow keys, though, we override all of that and end up with even divisions again, regardless of where the grid is. So if we chop this into 7, for example, now we have, I don't know what this is, some kind of 10 tuplet, 3 of the values here, and then some kind of 7 tuplet inside that. This is really powerful. It's great for making weird but mathematically accurate rhythmic divisions. Okay, so how might you use this to do some damage to this first 3 bars of this piece? So let's take a look at it 1 bar at a time, and we'll do this in 2 passes. So there's an upper voice and a lower voice that you can see in the parts, and these are just determined by which direction the stems go in. By the way, I should maybe preface this by saying this is really hard music to read. I can't really read it, but I can piece it together slowly. If you have no experience with notation, this probably looks like noise. It may sound like noise by the end, but you might learn some interesting things about rhythmic notation through this exercise anyway. So let's start with the top line of the first bar here. This is completely even divisions. It's just some combination of 64th notes and dotted 32nd notes. So each of these beats is actually identical. And so what we need is a 64th note grid here, and we can do that. We already have that here. There isn't actually a 64th grid option available, but if we choose the adaptive grid and choose medium in our bar of 4/8 here, if we zoom in a little bit, you can see that we've changed the values here to 64th notes. So what is this? It's 1/64th followed by a dotted 32nd, which is worth 3, followed by another dotted 32nd, which is worth 3, followed by a rest, a 64th note rest. And this rhythm repeats 4 times. So let's just duplicate that 4 times. So we have one of those patterns on each beat. Now I haven't distributed this to the notes yet. And what I'm using here for instrumentation is the description of the instruments that Steve Schick used, that he referred to in the article. The instrumentation is left up to the performer to decide for this piece, but I've copied his and found interesting samples for this. So a high woodblock, a bongo, an opera gong with a little bit of glissando at the end, a conga, a cowbell. There's a call for a tom with a wooden head. I could not find a sample of this, so I chose like a 606 drum machine sample, which sounds nothing like a wooden head, but it's kind of a cool sound, and a low tom. Okay. So let's maybe distribute these onto the right voices here. So the top line, then the second line, then the top line again. 3 lines down, middle line, top line, middle line, down, and middle line, top line, middle line. Okay. And we could also spend some time in the dynamics for this. For the purposes of this exercise, maybe I won't be so detailed with all of the dynamics, but let's just say sforzandos, so really loud on the beats. And let's listen to this now, maybe with a metronome, just to hear what it sounds like. Okay, so far, so good. What's going on in this bottom voice here? Well, we have complex tuplets. So far, only one layer of complex tuplets. You'll see in the second bar we get to something a little gnarlier. But these tuplets are conveniently written in such a way that the non-tuplety form of the note is represented as the bottom of a ratio. So these are 10 out of 12. 12 what? It doesn't really matter. 64ths in this case. 12 64ths, and then 1 beat at the end. And we know 1 beat will be worth, let's zoom in again a little bit, 8 64th notes. So if our grid is set to 64ths, we don't have to think about much more than this. We can say, let's find 12 of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and make a note there. That's 12 long. We can duplicate this, that'll be another 12, and then the last beat is empty. Okay. But what we need is not 12, but 10 in that amount of time. So we divide this by hitting Command E, continuing to hold down Command, and selecting 10 divisions. Do the same thing for the next one. 10. Now we have our 10 out of 12 tuplets, and then we just have to figure out what the groupings of those are so that we can rejoin the notes. So what is this? 3, a dotted 32nd plus a 16th, so that's 3. We'll rejoin these, plus 4, plus 2, plus 1, followed by, so that's the whole first chunk of 12, then followed by 3, plus 4, plus 2, plus 1. And now we can do a cool trick that's also new in Live, which is we can create a ramp so that we can deal with this diminuendo. So we want the thing to start loud and fade to mezzo piano. What do we think mezzo piano is? A velocity of 40 or something, and then it draws that ramp. And now we can just move these notes where we want them. So second line, third line, bottom line, second line, third line, bottom line, second line. Now, what does this sound like when we put it together? Okay, interesting rhythm. We listened to it on loop a few times. Interesting rhythm. You could program a rhythm like this manually, of course, but this one is actually mathematically accurate. It represents what's on the page. And that would be really challenging to do if you couldn't do these even divisions and rejoinings. Okay, let's look at bar 2. This one is somewhat gnarlier in terms of how it's divided, but we can sort it out. So this is a bar of 2/8. And what can we see in this? We have well, let's do the top line first, because that one's pretty straightforward. We have 4 sets of 3 triplets. So each of those triplets takes up half a beat, right? Because if we had 2 sets of triplets, that would be 1 beat each, 1/8 note each. But in this case, we have 4 sets, so there's 2 of them per beat. We could make a triplet grid here, but we don't even need to. We could say, let's see, that's our first beat, and we know that there's 2 sets of 3 in here, so we can divide this into 6. So now it's divided into 8, but we continue to hold down the command key, hit the up arrow, and divide this into 6. And how are those first 6 grouped? Well, 2 plus 1 and 2 plus 1. So rejoin the 2 plus 1 and 2 plus 1. And what's happening in the second 2 beats? Well, it's the same, right? It's the same rhythmic division, 2 plus 1 and 2 plus 1. So we can just duplicate that first chunk. And then we could distribute these to the right notes. So the top line, 2, 3, 4. 1 line up, top line, 2, 3 down, and 4 down, top line, and 2 down. And now if we listen to that, just that alone should be kind of a swung triplet feel. Okay, now this gnarly bottom line. Let's take a look at what's going on there. Well, again, we can see that there's some even divisions followed by a rest in a similar way to the first bar. And the rest is a 32nd note rest. So we know that that takes up the last 2 64ths of the bar, which tells you actually everything you need to know about the rest of the bar. All but the last 2 64ths need to fill 2 sets of 7 notes or 14 notes. So we can divide this into 14 even divisions. So what do we have here? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And each of those is in turn divided into 6, because we have a 6 tuplet in the time of 7 notes. So we rejoin this, split it again into 6, rejoin this, and split it again into, you know what, because this rhythm is repeated twice, let's just do this once and then duplicate it. So we have, this used to be 7 divisions, 7 64th notes, and then we joined it up again into 6, right? But now we need the last 3 of these to be split into 4. So we rejoin the last 3, split them into 4 evenly. And now we duplicate this once more. And if we did it right, we should end up with exactly 2 64th notes left over at the end. And we do. And now it's just a matter of distributing these notes to the right places. So bottom line 2 up, bottom line 2 up, bottom line 2 up, bottom line 2 up, bottom line 2 up. And we could deal with the sforzandos and the pianos if we wanted to. In fact, maybe to make that easier, what's the case here? All of the low notes are very loud, and all of the notes that are 2 lines up are supposed to be quite quiet. So we select all of those and drag them down. Now this one is pretty chaotic. And if we string these 2 bars together, what do we get? Okay, pretty wild and relatively straightforward to put together using the combination of slicing notes and joining them up again. Let's take a look at the last bar, and then we'll be done with this first system of music. So again, we'll do this with the top voice first, and then the bottom voice, or we could do it 1 beat at a time. Doesn't really matter. But let's take a look at how this works. So we're in 5/8. And we have 5 groupings of 7s at the top. So each beat is divided into 7 chunks. So we'll make a note that's a beat long, and we'll divide that into 7 chunks. And then we just have to figure out how this is parsed up. So a 16th followed by a dotted 16th. So 1, 2. We'll join those, followed by a dot. The dot adds an additional 1. So 1, 2, 3, followed by 2 32nd note septuplets. Now it's a little bit tricky to read this here because the beaming of the notes goes across the bar and doesn't match where the brackets break, the brackets of the septuplets. So, but we know that we need another 7 here, so we'll chop this beat into, we made 1 long note. We'll chop that into 7. The first 2 of these are 32nd note septuplets, followed by a 16th, which is a 2, followed by a dotted 16th, which is 3. And then we need 1 more beat divided into 7. Oops. If you don't do this in one gesture, you end up changing something else about the note. It's a strange key combination. It's Command E, then let go of the E and hold the Command down and use the up and down arrow keys. So we divided that into 7. And how does this work? It's a dotted 16th again. So 3 followed by 2 followed by another 16th, which we group. Now beat 4. We'll make yet again. We make 1 long note, divide this into 7. And then what's happening here? A grouping of 2, a grouping of 3, because it's a dotted note, and then 2 more fast notes. Oh, it looks like the first half of this bar is the same as the second half. Is that right? The first half of the bar is the same as the second half. I don't know. Let's not worry about that. Finally, 1 more. Divide this into 7. Oops. 5, 6, 7. And then we have, again, the bracket and the beams don't match. So we want 2 fast notes followed by 2, followed by dotted 16th. Oops, not split, but join, followed by 1/16. Okay, that's fine. Notice the voices sort of cross here, so maybe we'll do the bottom line, the bottom voice as a single voice. This one is maybe even more straightforward. It's 4 groupings of 5. So it's still across 5/8. So probably the easiest way to do that is to make 1 note that's the entire bar long and divide it into 4 times 5 groups. So 20. 20, and then each of the 5 we turn into 4. So we select 5 and rejoin them and turn that split again into 4. And actually, now that we've done that, we can just delete every other beat. And now we delete the middle 2, right? Because there's a 32nd followed by a 16th rest, followed by another 32nd. Duplicate that 4 times, and that's the rhythm for the whole bar. And we can distribute these now among the voices. Maybe we can first do a little bit with the dynamics. So this one is cool. We have a crescendo followed by a diminuendo. So the first 4 notes in this gesture, we'll say, give it a range of 40 to 127. And the last 4, we'll do the opposite, say 127 to 40. Actually, let's listen to that pattern first, maybe with a metronome, because it's a cool one. Against a metronome, it sounds kind of like a relatively straightforward groove. Well, without the metronome, it sounds like a relatively straightforward groove. With the metronome, it's very strange, right? And now let's mute this voice and listen to just the composite rhythm of this top voice. Oop, I didn't unmute it. There. Okay, and now we can distribute these to the appropriate instruments as necessary. So start at the top, highest voice, and then 4 down, and then 2 more at the top, and then 4 down, 2 more at the top. Now beat 3, 4 down, 2 at the top, 4 down, 2 at the top. So you can see there's a pattern here, 4 down and 2 at the top, 4 down and 2 at the top. And these are all quiet. And these are all loud. And now finally, we have to distribute the instruments for the bottom line. So what is this? 5 up from the bottom or 3 from the top? And here we overlap a little bit with the next note. So we can just change the durations of these because we don't want to run into the note. Again, these are percussion instruments, so the duration doesn't really matter so much. And 2, 1 below that, 1 down, bottom, and then we come back up the pattern again. 3 and back up here. So when we put this all together now, what does the bar sound like? Okay, and if we put all 3 bars together, what do we get? Okay, so is this the best way to learn a piece of music like this? It's hard to say. I don't know what the right answer is, but it's an interesting way of making yourself go slow through a really complicated score, and also pushing at the boundaries of what the note chopping and rejoining stuff can do in Live 12. This is a pretty interesting way to create very complicated rhythms like the kind you see in these 3 bars of music, in a way that's relatively straightforward in live. And this is only possible because of this new note chopping and rejoining functionality in Live 12.